So this year we're starting with Chris Yahnke, who comes to the university in 2001. For those of you who don't know who I am, I'm Eric Yahnke. I'm the other Yahnke on campus, who since 2001 has tried to answer biology questions horribly.
I try to answer history questions horribly.
So Chris came to 2001. Chris is originally from Milwaukee. He did his undergraduate work in zoology at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee and his graduate work at Northern Illinois. One thing I think really interesting about all of this is with all of his work in Chilean Paraguay and working in the Peace Corps, different work that he's been involved in, it was in 2006, after that point, that he and students started getting involved, particularly looking at the problem in the bat communities with Whitenose Syndrome, which started to first appear in 2006. I also like highlighted for me here, which I think is fabulous, is that as he calls himself a proponent of course-based undergraduate research experiences. And what it means, therefore, is that Chris currently has 75 students in mammalogy that are working on bat-related research projects and 25 other students working on projects on a national squirrel behavior study. So he's quite busy with students out in the field, and the work on bats continues since 2006, so it's quite a project. Last spring, too, Chris notes that he worked with the Urban Ecology Center in the Milwaukee area high school with high school teachers to develop a bat curriculum for K-12 students. And so, I'm just delighted to kick off this year's community lecture series with Chris talking to us about bats under time.
All right, well, thanks for coming. It's such a beautiful day. I didn't expect anyone to actually be here. And I guess I'd like to start with the big why. Why bats? Why study bats? And this little brown bat flying over Wisconsin. So this is a picture taken by Merlin Tuttle. And you may have heard of Merlin Tuttle. He's really well known for his bat photography. He developed a slow motion photography capture system to capture all these wonderful images of bats. But he was curator of mammals at the Milwaukee Public Museum back in the 80s. And in the 80s, he started an organization called Bat Conservation International. And he took that organization down to Austin, Texas, where it's now flourishing. And Austin, if you know anything about Austin, is like bat crazy America. It's like one of the premier bat cities in the country. But it all started really right here in Wisconsin with Merlin Tuttle and BCI. But he took this picture flying over Wisconsin, and a little brown bat can eat up to 400 insects in a night. When my wife and I lived in Dubuque, Iowa, we had 300 little brown bats in our attic, and each night they went out and ate about 250,000, 500,000 insects in a night. So we didn't get a lot of mosquito bites when we lived in Dubuque, Iowa. Not all bats eat insects. No, I'm sorry, I'm just slowly going to get this working. Or actually, we'll come back to that in just a bit. But bats don't just eat mosquitoes. Some bats eat moths. A lot of our Wisconsin bats eat moths. And moths were caterpillars, and caterpillars can do a lot of foliage damage. And so one estimate is that bats eat up to, save about $20 billion in pesticide costs each year. So instead of using a pesticide, the bats are actually eating those caterpillars. But how they're foraging for these is really cool as well. They're doing this in a three-dimensional space. Sometimes we call these like aerial hawking bats. It sounds really cool. All it means is they're catching the insects on the wing. So they're up there flying. They locate that insect using echolocation, using sound. Okay, the echo bounces back, and then in that three-dimensional space, they have to locate, is it above me, below me, to the left, to the right, and they do that very, very quickly. To give you an idea what that might be like, we are two-dimensional foragers. So we just had dinner. I ate the hamburger right off the plate. It's a two-dimensional thing. I just have to find it, pick it up, eat it, okay? It's not like someone threw the hamburger at me and I had to like locate it in space. You could do something like that. Just get a bag of M&Ms or maybe just popcorn. When you throw popcorn at people and then you try to catch it in the air, that's a little bit what it's like. Now turn the lights off and start doing that. And now turn the lights off and start running at each other and doing that. And that's kind of what it's like to be a bat trying to catch these things in the air. Okay. All right. Another reason we want to study bats is they're a really important, they're very diverse. Okay, this is called a bioscape. So what I've done is I've represented the different, of the 20 mammalian orders, I've represented them, proportionally based on size, right? So that squirrel, that giant terrorizing squirrel there, that's like 42% of all mammal species are rodents. Okay, so that's representing the rodents. And then I've got a bat, about 22% of all mammal species, 5,500 species, about 22%, 1,200 or so species are bats, okay? So between rodents and bats, we've got about 64, 65% of all diversity in mammals in those two orders. And then the other 18 orders make up the other 35%. So here we've got primates and insectivores, all of the, deer, really are only a few percent, 4 or 5%. This possum here, that represents 1%. So that entire order of New World marsupials is only 1% of the diversity. So bats are very diverse, about 1,200 species. Here in Wisconsin, all of our bats eat insectivores, or eat insects. They're insectivores. Okay, we've got about 8 species of bats here in Wisconsin. All of them eat insects, but not all bats eat insects. So this is called a bulldog bat. This is from Central and South America, and these are fishing bats. So they will go over a fairly calm stream and look for perturbations in the water, and then they'll grab a fish. Okay, a small fish. We're not talking about fishing bats. Okay, so they'll grab a small fish. So there's fish-eating bats. There are a lot of fruit bats. The famous ones are the big old world fruit bats like the flying foxes. But we also have smaller fruit bats like the Jamaican fruit bat, which is kind of a famous one because it's on the label of Bacardi rum. And so if you see that Bacardi rum label and you look at the bat on there, that's actually a Jamaican fruit bat. And the legend is that Mrs. Bacardi, don't know her name, we'll just call her Mrs. Bacardi, thought that they had fruit bats in the distillery when they bought it, and she saw that as a very lucky symbol, and so they put that bat on Bacardi. Other bats are nectivores. The famous group of nectivore bats are the long-nosed bats that pollinate agave. Okay, so they're responsible for tequila. Okay. There are, most tequila that is made from farmed agave now, but there actually are bat-friendly tequilas now. You have to look for them and they'll be labeled bat-friendly, which means that a portion of their farms are left to flower and be utilized by bats. Okay. Now the most famous of the bats are the blood-drinking bats. And of the 1,200 species of bats, there's 3 that are truly, that feed on blood, vampires. And they're all from South America and Central America. And one of them feeds on mammals, the common vampire bat, and the other 2 are bird specialists. Okay. So now, these are the ones that, led to Dracula. Okay. And of all the bat movies, this is my favorite one, okay? So this is the devil bat. It's got Bela Lugosi in the 40s toward the end of his career, and it's just a wonderfully bad movie. When the bat comes at you, it's basically a kite, and the actors will grab the kite and hold it to their neck and go, ah! Okay, it's so good, okay? Now, many of you probably know of Bela Lugosi as the original Dracula. Okay. And what I love about this 1933 rendition of Dracula is how biologically accurate it is. How true it is to the biology of vampire bats. If you've seen it, you'll see like a shadow of a bat, and then all of a sudden Bela Lugosi's in the room and he manifests himself as Dracula. So he lands in the room. He doesn't just, as a bat, fly and flop on the poor woman here, okay? And so vampire bats basically will land close to their prey, okay? and then they will walk up to the prey, which is what he's doing here. He's walking up. And then he's assessing. He's looking for an artery where the blood is close to the skin. That's what vampire bats do. They've got infrared sensors in their nose where they can detect where the blood is close. And then they will plunge their fangs into the prey. But they have anesthetic and they have anticoagulants in their saliva that they will also use to keep that blood flowing, and that the prey doesn't feel it. So they don't kill the prey. They might weaken it if it's a very young prey. But anyway, there's a couple other things that are accurate about Dracula that I'll get to in just a bit. So vampire bats do all of these things that are very Dracula-like, but they're also really good moms, okay, which Dracula's not, okay. They're colonial, so they will share blood with close relatives. They will babysit so that the colony of females will, some will stay back, babysit, some will go out and forage, look after the pups. Let's not anthropomorphize. They will look after the pups, and then the female will come back full of blood that she has just taken, and then share that with her pups and her sisters and her mom and her grandma. And this is a fairly stable maternity colony. Turns out our little brown bats are like that too, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. And you gotta admit, even vampire bat babies are cute. Okay. The last thing I'll say about kind of a Dracula, how similar they are, is bats are pretty long-lived. For a small mammal, this is a Wisconsin bat. I think this is one of the record holders now. A little brown bat that was banded in 1983. It was recaptured at the same hibernation cave, and that's actually good data, in 2015, making that at least 33 years old. At least 33 years old. We don't know exactly how old. When you age bats, you basically have two categories. 1 year, more than 1 year. That's it. Because all we can really tell is by looking at the wrist bones on a light box, if those bones are unfused, that's a first-year bat. If they're fused, it's older than that. And that's as good as we can get currently. Okay. So bats are really cool, but there's two major threats to bats right now in this country. The one that you may have heard of is Whitenose Syndrome. Whitenose Syndrome is a fungus that showed up in 2006 in New York State, and it's called Whitenose Syndrome because it manifests close to the nose. Okay, so they are still breathing even though they've dropped their temperature down to close to freezing. That's what hibernation is. And so they get like a little bit of a fungus around the nose. But that's really not where it's doing most of its damage. What's doing the damage is it's getting into the wing membrane, and it's causing irritation, and it's causing the bats to arouse more frequently than they can. It takes a lot of energy to go from 32 degrees to 98.6. So, and they fire that furnace up about every couple of weeks throughout the winter. So, I used to think bats, when they go to sleep in the fall, they don't wake up until the spring. I think that about my chipmunks. Well, that's not true. They're coming in and out of hibernation all winter, okay? Bats are like that. But they can only do it so many times before they use up all their energy stores. So what's happening with whitenose is they're coming out too often, and then they don't have any energy. They start flying around in February during the day looking for insects. There aren't any, and then they just don't do well after that. So this is causing 90 to 100% mortality in a hibernacula. So you can have 30,000, 50,000 bats, and it's almost wiping out that entire cave, that entire hibernacula in a single winter. So it's a big, saying it's a big problem is an understatement. Since I gave a similar talk in March, I added 3 states and 1 Canada province just in the last couple months to this list, okay? So this fungus has killed between 5 and 7 million bats, 36 states, 6 Canadian provinces. And if you look, it started in New York, and where that little circle is, and then year by year it's been spreading north, south, and then west. Okay. In 2014, if you look at Wisconsin, it pretty much entered the state simultaneously from the Upper Peninsula and then down in the tri-state area with Iowa and Florida. And so it kind of pinched us at both of those points. And it's been spreading in Wisconsin ever since. It jumped all the way to Washington State a couple years ago. We think it's probably, how it originally got to New York was probably a spelunker from Europe that brought the fungus from Europe. There's been a lot of education on safe caving, but for it to jump all the way across the Mississippi to Washington in 1 year seems to be more of a caving thing, human distributed versus bat distributed. Okay, so this is kind of the big, one of the big national problems we're dealing with as wildlife biologists. And we've got wildlife veterinary people, we've got molecular biologists, we've got a lot of people working on this. One of the tools that we have at our disposal is genomics. So they did an entire genome study of little brown bats, and they found in the genome there was a mutation in a gene that repaired DNA from UV damage. Another way of saying that is, or I'm sorry, in the fungus, we did the genome of the fungus, not the bat. So the fungus cannot repair UV damage. It's a cold, loving, dark, cave fungus. Okay, so it's pretty much, it's not exposed to sunlight. Okay, so that explains that. So you can actually treat this with UV light and kill the fungus. It's not like problem solved. It's like, how do you treat 20,000 bats, 30,000 bats, 7 million bats, in a hibernaculum, one by one? Is there a way that we can treat entire caves with UV light? How do you disinfect a cave? I mean, these are big problems, but there's a lot of people working on this problem. How do you vaccinate, a swarm of bats? It's like you don't just have them come in, because the sign says free vaccinations, and then just line them up. I mean, these are problems, but as we're solving these wildlife medicine problems, they're going to have applications in other spaces. The other big threat, okay, so let's just kind of talk about, there's 3 bats that are really getting clobbered by Whitenose syndrome in the state. There are local hibernating bats. The bats that stay here in Wisconsin and hibernate in caves. Those are the little brown bats, the northern long-eared bats, and the eastern pipistrelle. So those are the 3 that are kind of succumbing, if you will, to this disease. We have other bats that have other threats. And so we have tree cavity nesting bats. And they're migratory bats. So these are migrating actually from Canada and Alaska all the way through Wisconsin, all the way down to Missouri and the Ohio River Valley in that area. And they tend to hang out in trees, okay, in tree cavities, okay. These are getting clobbered by wind turbines, and clobbered is maybe not the right word. We used to think that they were getting hit by the blades of the spinning turbine, and then this brilliant graduate student at the University of Alberta named Erin Bearwald figured out it's not. She was collecting all these bats, and there wasn't a lot of damage to the skeleton, but when she actually looked at it, all of their thoracic cavities had burst. And so this was something called pleuropneumonia, not pleuropneumonia. I just totally blanked now that I said pleuropneumonia. But it's like pleural trauma. So their thoracic cavity is bursting. Okay. So as the pressure on the blade changes from one to the other, and they fly through that spinning blade, their lungs just can't take it, and they just, and so it's called barotrauma. If you're taking notes, it'll be on the test. Barotrauma. Okay. So the bats that are susceptible to that here in Wisconsin are hoary bats, red bats, and silver-haired bats. And one estimate out of Canada, about 15.5 deaths per turbine per year. So when you drive from Oshkosh down to Milwaukee by Fond du Lac, you can kind of do the math. Up to 1 million bats a year are killed by turbines. Okay. Now, I'll get to the design in just a bit, but this is Paul White at the DNR. Basically just collected these and put them in there for a picture. This wasn't, he didn't find them this way. But here you've got a red bat, a silver-haired bat, and a hoary bat that he collected near a single turbine. Okay. And this is here in Wisconsin. But there are people trying to work on this problem as well. So there's a few different hypotheses on what these bats are cueing on. Tori Bennett down at TCU, I met her this summer. Her team is working on the hypothesis that bats think that the smooth surface of the turbine, they're confusing it for water. Now, it seems to us that that's silly because, well, a turbine's in this plane and we're in this plane. Here's a fun fact. You're not a bat, okay? So you're not working in the same three-dimensional flying around that they are. So to them, flying up a smooth surface, what they're really cueing on are the echoes. This is an echo that they're getting off of water that is telling that bat that this is what water is. So that's the acoustic echo of water, okay? It's thought that this is innate. They're born knowing that signal. It's so important that they can find water. This is the acoustic signal off of the smooth surface of a wind turbine. It's pretty much identical, okay? So her team is working on the thesis or on the hypothesis that they're confusing it with water. That they, and night vision surveys have shown that bats will fly up and basically try to lick the smooth surface of the turbine, okay? In the same way that they would take a drink of water. So they had the idea that what if we can perturb that smooth surface? What if we can put a rough structure on the turbine, okay? And so that's what they're doing, at least they're trying to do. In flight rooms, which means in her lab, they just let bats go in a room like this, and they have like poles just like this. It almost looks, this could be their lab. They have a smooth surface. They've got some that have different textures on them. They let the bats go. They've got all these cameras in there, and they're basically just seeing what are the bats doing. So in a flight room, they found that bats are going to go more to a smooth surface than a rough surface. So then they wanted to field test that. So this is a wind turbine in West Texas where they're actually wrapping it with a texture to see if it would deter bats, okay? That was $250,000 to wrap one, okay? Now, so she kind of ran out of money, she did two. At one of her turbines, bats were reduced, at another turbine they were increased. It's like, okay, but it's science, okay? So at some point, if this pans out, you can kind of envision the actual manufacturing process building the texture into it to reduce the cost, okay? Another hypothesis is that this looks like a tree. It looks like a tree to a bat, okay? And so, again, there are scientists working on these problems. All right. So what are we doing in Wisconsin? Well, in 2007, February 2007, that's when Whitenose Syndrome kind of popped up out in New York. Dave Retel, who was the bat ecologist at that time at the DNR, basically started a program to start collecting data. He knew as soon as that first paper came out, as soon as the first bats started dying, that this could be a big problem. And he had the foresight to start to put a program together in Wisconsin. This is Dave outside the Needham mine. Those of us in the bat world in Wisconsin really look up to Dave for getting this whole thing started. He died very prematurely of brain cancer about 5 years ago. But just a brilliant guy, and his wife Jennifer is actually, Jennifer Retel is in this picture right here. That's Dave's wife. This is a former student of mine here at Point, Jennifer Summers, Paul White. So what the Wisconsin Bat program is, it's a collaboration between the citizens and bat biologists to get as much and as good bat data as we can, okay? It's multifaceted. If you go to their Wisconsin Bat Program website, there's roost monitoring, which means that if you have like bats on your property, you can monitor those bats and upload that data to the site. Heather Karaka, who took this picture, so she's behind the camera, runs that program. I'll show you some examples of what that might look like in just a bit. What we're involved with my students is the acoustic monitoring, and there's a couple ways that we do that. This team here is actually going into the caves every winter and doing bat censuses and looking to see if this is a clean cave or if this cave has succumbed to Whitenose Syndrome. And so this is the team, so as we build those maps, they're the ones that are verifying, or sending, actually the big pathology lab that verifies all this is in Madison. It's USGS, and another pointer, Kyle George, another former student, is one of the people working down there on Whitenose Syndrome and verifying all of this. Okay, so lots of ways that even for you to get involved, and I'll share that a little bit more in just a bit. Okay, so kind of the main way that people are getting involved are these acoustic walking surveys. So this is 3 Bridges Park, which is right in the Menominee Valley. It's right near Miller Park, if you know your way around Milwaukee. So it's very urban. And here they've got a mobile bat detector, and they're just going around and doing a bat walk. Then they upload that to the Wisconsin Bat Program site. Bat biologists there look at that data, and then they'll interpret that, and then they'll send you a map. And I'll show you an example of what one of those maps looks like in just a bit. That unit there, with everything, is about, I'd say, $2,500, $3,000. It's got a PDA with a GPS attached to it. And you can rent these, but the closest one we have here in Point is in Wapaka at Hartman Creek State Park. Okay, so these mobile surveys are one way to get involved. Okay, so these are permanent stations. So another thing that they did is they established permanent bat stations, 5 of them throughout the state, and these are continuously monitoring bats throughout the year. This is the station we have at Schmeekley Reserve. And so it's basically that unit is now enclosed. It's charged by a solar panel. The microphone's up there. The bat, there's a little thing that it'll bounce it up. And then you get these series of sonograms. So this is actually what the data looks like. They're bat passes. They're sonograms. And so this is what now we'll see if I touch the right side of the thing. Okay. This is what a sonogram looks like for a little brown bat. We've got kilohertz on the y-axis, we've got time on the x-axis, and the higher the call, the lower the wavelength, the smaller the insect it can detect. Okay. So this is about 40 to 80 kilohertz, so these are the ones that are eating mosquitoes. This is a red bat. It's actually in the similar range of frequencies, but it's got a much different shape. And so a bat ecologist would be able to look at that and say, yep, this looks like a red bat, this looks like a little brown bat, this looks like a hoary bat, whatever it might be. And so this is the data that my students and I have been looking at. Okay, so we've been looking at three bat stations, Schmeekley here in Sumter, Wisconsin. We have one up on Lake Tomahawk in Woodruff at Kemp Natural Resource Station. And then we're looking at one with the Urban Ecology Center down in southeastern Wisconsin, down in Milwaukee, along the Milwaukee River. Okay, so the other thing with this data is the DNR doesn't actually have time or personnel or money to actually look at this. So they're quite happy to have me and my students looking at this data. Okay, and so there's a lot of good information in this. So here's just looking at Kemp Station, just looking at this northern Wisconsin station. And if you just look at all the bats, you can see in 2014, this is the year that Whitenose Syndrome showed up in the state. It just falls off a cliff. Okay, So it's not like it was a gradual decline of bats in northern Wisconsin. It was a dramatic, rapid decline of bats in northern Wisconsin. Now this is all bats. We want to get a little bit more fine grain in there. So let's kind of like break it out and look at the different bats. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different species of bats that we're finding up flying around near Lake Tomahawk. And there's clearly 2 common bats up there. There's the red bat and there's the little brown bat. So if we start looking at the red bat and the little brown bat, we see that the little brown bat in 2014 went off a cliff, and then 2 years later really went off a cliff. So you go up into northern Wisconsin now and start like listening for little brown bats. At least at this station, they're not around. Okay. But as we started looking at that data, we started asking different questions because we noticed something strange. Red bats all declined coincident with little brown bats, and that shouldn't have happened because red bats are not susceptible at all to Whitenose syndrome. Okay, so what's going on with red bats? So this is leading to new questions. We don't know, but we have, we're formulating new hypotheses, and we can test those. So the red bat, a student of mine, Rachel Conkle, and her team, going again through this CURE, this course-based undergraduate research experience, they developed a presentation that looked at something called eavesdropping. They presented data that was pretty convincing, convincing enough for us to follow up on it and design an experiment that said that when little brown bats are flying down here, red bats, which have a similar frequency of foraging, listen to that. Okay, we kind of noticed the potato chip hypothesis. If someone's eating potato chips in here or opens up a bag of potato chips over there, everyone's gonna be like, potato chips. Okay, I want potato chips. And then we all just go back there. And so that's what these red bats are like, potato chips. But it's not, it's bugs. And so they can hear the echolocation of the little brown bat, and they're gonna go down and investigate. Little brown bats are gone, they're not investigating. So they're probably not going down in numbers, they're just not flying low near our microphones. Okay, so they're probably still there. So we can test that. I don't know how, we're gonna have to rent a bunch of hot air balloons and go up and try to measure at different heights. Same thing with this. This was a relatively rare bat in most of our surveys up until Whitenose hit, and now it's just the common bat. This is the Hoary Bat. So what's going on with Hoary Bats? And again, we've got this huge ecospace. We've got this huge volume of space. So if the red bats and the red bats and the little brown bats are foraging close to the lake and close to the ground, Hoary bats are probably just saying, I'm just going to stay up here. There's plenty of food up here. I don't need to compete with food down there. When the bats disappear at those lower elevations, down closer to the ground, the Hoary Bat is just expanding its niche. It's expanding its range where it's foraging. So this is the other thing that's happening. It's not that their numbers necessarily are increasing. The populations aren't increasing. They're just flying close to our microphones now. Okay, and so that's interesting. And we're seeing a similar phenomenon across the state as we look at these data. But here's something else that we discovered. Little brown bats aren't common everywhere in the state. It's really a northern Wisconsin bat. So if you look at all of our stations, here in central Wisconsin, down in Milwaukee, it's a relatively uncommon bat, okay? So it's northern Wisconsin that is seeing the biggest hit on with Whitenose syndrome, because that's where those bats were most common, was up in the north, flying over those lakes, picking off mayflies, picking off all those aquatic insects. Okay. All right, so as Eric mentioned, I spent in spring down in Milwaukee with the Urban Ecology Center trying to take all of this data that we had and package it in a way that could be used for K-12 education. And there's a whole bunch of different modules that I won't get into, but the one that I was most interested in is getting big data into high schools. Okay, so we're looking at big data is kind of a buzzword right now. How do you handle large data sets? And by large data sets, what we're talking about here with the bats is relatively small, but if they can do that, then they at least can wrap their head around a matrix of millions and billions or billions and billions. If you're thinking in human genomes, for example, you've got 3 billion base pairs and you've got 7 billion people. That's a big matrix, okay? So the computing to handle that, the math to handle that, starts with just some level of comfort with data sets that large. So this is our, we're right now figuring out how to get it out. Right now it's just individual teachers that are looking at this. The DNR is helping me get it out, but also Canvas Commons. So anyone that uses Canvas in their schools, I'm putting that out, and so you can search bats and find my curriculum that way. And I'm doing individual modules, so it's little bite-sized pieces. But one of the first things students can discover, they can build these graphs, they can use real Wisconsin data to look at this. So right now we're at about 320,000 files, so that's bat calls, and then you can learn how to use Excel to summarize that data. So this is just looking at, again, location. So working or starting in Milwaukee makes a little bit of sense because bats are still fairly common in Milwaukee. And there's a good reason bats are fairly common in Milwaukee. Look at that blue line. That's about 1/3 of all the bats that we have collected acoustically in the state are a single species in Milwaukee, big brown bats. Big brown bats are neither susceptible to whitenose nor wind turbine crashes. They're like the bat that's kind of not under threat, if you will. Okay, so so a lot of times if people say I have a bat in my, and there's a bat in the library or there's a bat somewhere, I'm almost going to default to it's probably a big brown bat. They're doing okay right now. So yeah, Milwaukee is doing pretty well. If I want to go out and find bats with a bat detector, I can do that pretty readily in Milwaukee. Okay. Again, here in northern Wisconsin, you talk to people around. I was just up in Ashland for the Wisconsin Bat Festival. We brought it up there for a reason, because this is where we're seeing these declines. Everyone I talk to up in Ashland, I really am not seeing as many bats as I have. That is going to be a typical thing a northern Wisconsinite's going to say. Down in Milwaukee, they probably don't really consider bats all that much, but the populations there, you're not seeing that same decline. Here in Schmeekley, we do have a bit of a dip. The other thing we have, our detector is, for some reason, we've kind of dropped a lot of data. This year, for example, a hornet's nest formed right over the microphone, and basically we lost, and they didn't find it until the end of July, and so it's basically there's like no data, and then it's like all crickets, and so I had 75,000 files that I weeded through to get like a handful of bats, and so it's a lot of. Fortunately, now there's some software programs that can help me do that. But yeah, so there's holes in the day because there's technology and things kind of don't always work the way that they're supposed to. Okay, something else that we did. So Josh Scadam, a student of mine, when he was here, he did an internship at the Marshfield Zoo, and we said, let's get a detector out at the Marshfield Zoo. Let's see, because we knew that whitenose was coming in, the fungus was coming in from the north through the UP and then up through the tri-state area. So we kind of had this idea that central Wisconsin would be one of the last places that it shows up. And sure enough, we were right. When we started looking at the bat communities in Marshfield in 2016, this looked like a northern Wisconsin bat community, in 2013. There were a lot of little brown bats flying around. In fact, this is one of the most diverse bat communities that I have found. It's just like, on any given night in Marshfield, you can walk around at the zoo with the bat detector, you can find 5 species of bats pretty easily, okay? And I'll kind of show you how to do that. And it's only this summer that we see a kink in the armor, that we see, if you look at little brown bat, and now we're seeing the decline in the little brown bats here in central Wisconsin. So that was a little bit discouraging. Josh designed this really cool aluminum bat sign, so you can go out and see his cool bat sign too. That's where we have the detector. It's over near the wolf cage, if you're familiar with the zoo over there. If you've never been there, it's free. So the price is right, and you can kind of do some stuff. The other thing that we're starting to do a bit more are these mobile surveys with some new technology. So before I showed you like the Bat Detector that they were using that cost about $3,000. I'm testing these guys now. This is a Bat Detector that costs about $170. That fits right on your iPhone or your iPad or your Android device. You download an app through Wildlife Acoustics called Echometer. In that app, you can select the state that you're in, Wisconsin, and then if you have location turned on, it will, you put that on, you turn everything on, you make sure it's recording, you walk around, and when a bat shows up, you'll see it on the screen. It'll just ping on the screen. It will get a geotag from that bat, and it will identify that bat, and it'll plop it on a map. So that is, right now the DNR is like, yeah, I don't know if it's going to work. So I'm like, yeah, it's too cool to not try. And so I had a chance to go to Chambers Island about a month ago. I don't know if anyone's ever even heard of Chambers Island. I hadn't. It's in Green Bay. So you've got Fish Creek. You take a boat out there. It's all privately owned properties out there. There's like no stores or anything. So we just stayed with some people, and we did some what's called a bio blitz. So a bio blitz is you get a whole bunch of people with different expertise in spiders and snakes and mammals, birds and plants, and you descend on a place, and then in one day you try to identify as many species as you can. Okay, so that's what a bio blitz is. And so we've been doing them because the person that kind of came up with this in Washington, D.C. back in the 80s is now the director of research at the Milwaukee Public Museum, Ellen Sensky, and so she's doing bio blitzes around the state right now. So we're going to try to get one up here in central Wisconsin at some point. So that's what we were doing on Chambers Island. But the reason I said yes to this, I didn't think I was going to find a lot of cool rodents on an island, but I'm like, I wonder what the bat community is like on Chambers. So we went out batting, and so we got to this one property, and the Fletchers, and he said, oh, we have a bat house. I'm like, oh, we'd love to see your bat house. And we got to the bat house and looked down, and we found a pile of guano, bat poop. A lot of people ask me, oh, I want to put up a bat house. If you put up a bat house, that's what it's supposed to look like. You're supposed to, that means it is a really, they love your bat house. That's what that says. I haven't seen that under a bat house in years. So this is a really active little brown bat colony in their bat house, okay? So I'm like, yeah, this is great. So I talked to the Fletchers. I said, you need to monitor this colony. The DNR is going to be very interested that you have a really active colony. Pointed them to the website. This is how you do it. You keep track. And they were really interested. They had no idea that they had this treasure on the back of their garage. I gave a woman, MJ, one of these. I said, here, put this on your iPhone. We downloaded the app. I said, over the next 2 days, just walk around the island at night. Because we were on different parts of the island, and we didn't all have cars and stuff like that. I said, just get it back to me before I go. Showed her how to use it. So she collected bat data. Someone had no idea how to use this technology, and I said, and she figured out how to collect the data, package it, and email it to me. And then I could download it, and I created this map. Look at this. It's all little brown bats. All these little brown bats. Federally endangered long-eared bats. This is like what northern Wisconsin looked like in 2013 on Chambers Island. They're really excited. Ben, MJ's husband's like, we got to get one of these. MJ's like, yeah, totally. Okay, so they're going to be out there collecting bat stuff. The Fletchers are going to be monitoring their box. This is what the DNR map is going to look like. So we had a DNR unit. We walked along. There's the Fletcher's house. There's Mary and Robin's where we were camping. And this is kind of the map that the DNR sent back. Okay, it's got some little brown bats. It shows you the date and how long the route was and who did this. And it's a really cool thing that you would get back. It takes a couple days. Hopefully they have people working on it. But there is a lag. But again, when I'm going out with people, it's in real time. I'm showing them the maps as they're being built. They're seeing what species is flying by as it flies by. And they are learning that by, MJ was like, by sound, after a few bats that came up as Milu, little brown bat, she's like, there's another little brown bat. Oh, that's something different. And then she'd wait for it. You're waiting on your phone and for the ID to pop up, because there's a little bit of a lag for the algorithm to run. And then it would come up as Hoary Bat. And she's like, that's something different. It's really exciting. She was really excited. They were like, I want one of these microphones, when I was demonstrating that. Keisha, she's down in Milwaukee. I met her in Wapaka. She's doing a master naturalist program. She's not a student. I just gave her one of these. I said, here, go just bat around Milwaukee. Let's solve these two problems for the DNR. The DNR won't use this until we can solve these two problems. So she's in Milwaukee working on those problems. And I'm trying to get her to come here for school, obviously. She's interested in Madison. I'm like, you don't want to go to Madison? Then I made the mistake up at the Bat Festival. My former student, Eric Olson, I said, Eric, where should she go to school? Well, Eric's an assistant professor now at Northland College. I'm like, no, don't ask Eric. Okay. So Eric's like, well, Point's good, but Northland's really good. So, and again, so up there where Robin and Mary's is, we just sat there. We didn't even move. We turned on the Bat Detector. We could see bats flying everywhere. We were getting all this data. Everyone was like really excited. And then we took our walk. And so this is what I was getting with our little mobile detector. It was a lot more detailed than what the DNR thing was getting. It was more immediate. And Robin and Mary were like, I said, man, we should put up a permanent bat detector here to see what's going on. And they're like, how much would that cost? How could we do that? These are, I don't know if you know about Chambers Island. These are third generation, relatively wealthy Milwaukee and Sturgeon Bay families. So we pretty much raised the money to put a bat detector up just standing there collecting bats. So we're going to have a permanent detector at Robin and Mary's. The Fletchers are going to do their bat roost counts. And then MJ is going to walk around with her microphone, and we're going to get all this great data from Chambers. All that data is going to be put into the curriculum. And so we're going to have Marshfield and all this stuff. So that part of it is just going to keep growing. OK. So that is my presentation. Thank you for your attendance. Okay. Any questions? I think we have a couple minutes before we get kicked out of here. I don't know. Questions? Yeah.
What is the working theory for why those 3 bats are more susceptible to the wind turbines?
Good question. I think a lot of it has to do, so these, one of the things that they have in common, they're echolocating at a much lower frequency, probably about 20, 25 kilohertz, which means that their wavelengths are longer. It's really hard, for example, to catch a little brown bat in a net. They can perceive the net, really quickly. So they're not perceiving the spinning blades. Again, when these blades are spinning, they're not spinning like this. They're kind of like these, kind of like slow blades. So they're not perceiving the blades, and then they're flying through the blades, and it's the pressure that's getting them. Okay. The other working theory is there's a couple of them. There's the theory that they're looking for water in their environment, or they're looking for a tree in their environment where they can rest for the night because they're migrating. They're going from point A to point B, and they overnight, or they spend the days. I'm sorry, their day roosts are in trees. Okay. And those are the two. I think the two main theories: water and trees, and so that's where some of the effort's going. The water is intriguing because I think there's a, you know, if Tori, if they can work on perturbing that, and if that is a thing, it could be a combination. It's like all of the above is probably the real answer. But yeah, it's migratory, tree cavity, nesting bats are the ones. Big brown bats are interesting because they're not migratory. They're actually spending their winters here, and they're spending it in the, you know, behind the shutters in your house or under the, you know, shingles in your roof. And so they're actually not in caves, but they're not migrating. Okay, so they're not as susceptible to these wind turbine crashes. Yeah, good question. Yeah.
In addition to putting up bat houses, what are some things that homeowners can do to benefit bats besides houses?
Gosh, that's a really good question, because the bat house is very tangible, but but the bat house is really there for these maternity colonies of little brown bats. Okay, it's not really aiding in roosting sites for big browns or any of these tree cavity nesting bats. So I guess, you know, if you think about like what are the bats using in their environment, one of the so having if you have trees on your property, so we have 13 trees on our property, even 2 of those aren't looking good. We've got pileated damage, but there's habitat in there for bats to spend their days. So I'm like, you know, a tree as an aesthetic in front of your house is one thing. A tree as habitat or a roosting site or as something else for squirrels and woodpeckers is something else. So there's still utility in that tree, even though it's like, okay, it's not doing so great. But I think bats will like it. So retaining some of those structures on your property, like trees. Our new science building, I don't know if I'm supposed to share this. It turns out that big brown bats really like the loading dock. There's some black fabric that when cars back up and they're kind of like clinging to that, and when a truck backs up into it, it flushes the bat and then they fly into the building. So Keith isn't super happy about this, but I'm like, okay, so there's bats there. What can we do? Okay, and we know that they like that fabric, and we know that they're there, and so maybe we could do something for those big brown bats so that it's a win-win. We give them somewhere to go, but they're not going to flush into the building. Okay, we know they like that fabric. Okay, can we do something about that, you know, to benefit the bats? Can we build some? I was kind of thinking, going back to the turbine, can we build? You know, so when I saw Tori's talk, I'm like, that's brilliant. What can you do if that was if it's to think about the trees? Could you build down low an actual place in the turbine that the bat would cue in on and roost, and actually use the turbine as a day roost and not fly up the thing and get hit by the blades? That would be a fairly easy thing to test. Are they using the roosts, you know, on these turbines? Okay, so that'll be my next big NSF proposal. So, and again, you could build that into the turbine design, the texture and the roost sites into the turbine design, and see if that works.
Are the cave nesting bats generally more susceptible to mold? Because generally mold goes for wet places, you know, very humid places. I think one from the trees would be less likely to get the mold, even if it wasn't a temperature issue.
Yes, but not all mold grows that cold. So whitenose, or the fungus that causes whitenose, right, the pathogen, is a particularly cold-loving fungus. Most fungi don't grow between 35 and 50 degrees Fahrenheit. You know, that's relatively cold for funguses. You know, they're going to do pretty well 60 to 75 or something like that. You get a lot of fungal growth there, and so. Yeah, that particular species or that particular genus does really well in this particular habitat. So, but you're absolutely right, Julie.
Did that whitenose fungus, was it there before and then somehow attacked bats, or is it a new?
It's thought that so it came from Europe, so it exists in Europe, and one thing that distinguishes Europe from U.S. or from the Americas. You know, it's only here that we have these huge you know, Spirit Cave, Bracken Cave, 20 million bats in a cave. That's not a thing in Europe. They don't have, you know, the Congress Avenue Bridge where there's 1 million free-tailed bats in Austin that people watch every night. That is not something that they have in Europe. So one of the ideas is that Whitenose Syndrome, maybe it was like that in the past. Whitenose Syndrome kind of came through and did its thing in Europe years ago. We don't know when. And what you have now is post-Whitenose. And so we can look to Europe and maybe say, maybe that's what post-Whitenose Syndrome looks like.
Is there a bat community okay now?
Yes, but again, you don't get the large congregations of bats. And Europeans, I will say, Europeans love their bats. If you've ever been to Ireland, if you've ever been to England, they are bat crazy. They love their bats. And so we can look to them for, you know, this is how you do education for bats, because not a lot of phobia there. They love them. Yeah.
Do you know about this curriculum that you're rolling out? Is it something that's in the works?
It's available to teachers now. It's just, I just need to get it out to them. So again, it's searchable in Commons, in Canvas Commons. You can send me an email and I can get you. The thing is, I have to figure out how to share the data set. 320,000 data lines doesn't email. So I'm doing shared folders, but I'm working with the DNR to figure out is there a site that we can use to distribute the curriculum with instructions and stuff like that. But there's some things that don't require the data. There's like art things that you can do with kids. Like I did this, it's called the Psychedelic Haiku Bat Hand. And it comes from Linda Berry, who's a professor at Madison, an art professor. And she has her students just trace their hands and then draw these really tight spirals. And it's really cool. Well, I add the webbing for the patagium, and I add a haiku in there. And then we discuss, like, what are the scientific lessons. So you can do that with everyone from 5th graders through college students. Because my college students were, I said, okay, what did you learn from this? And just last week, first day of class, they said, when you get stuck on one task, move to another. Because they'd get stuck on the haiku. And then they'd start drawing their little spirals. And then they'd think of something in the haiku, and they'd go back and do that. Scientists do that all the time. If they get stuck on a task, they move on to something else, and they come back to it. So they got that out of like this little art project, drawing a bat hand. Okay, so that's in the curriculum. I've got hip hop, slam poetry, but then I also have a lot of quantitative stuff. Okay, so a lot of math. So just say I want the bat curriculum. I'll send it to you. One more question. No one wants to be the last question. Yeah, James.
So is there a bat species that we know has changed its behavior from communal to non-communal?
Whoa.
We stump them on the last one.
No, I'm thinking of Wisconsin bats, and we have these transitional things. So our communal bats are actually are seasonally, not even season. So like the little brown bat, males aren't communal at all. The only time they're communal is in a hibernacula. Females are only communal during the birthing season, so they form these maternity colonies. As soon as the pups fledge, they're not communal anymore. And so from the point of view of the myotis, it would be smaller maternity colonies, or so there's probably some plasticity in that behavior. I don't know a lot of obligate communal bats. Maybe the Mexican free-tailed bat or the Brazilian free-tailed bat. I don't know if it's facultative or obligate. Okay. But I don't know, which is another hallmark of science. I don't know. All right, thank you.